Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to ShoutCraft. Been a while since I've said that. Hey, I had some time to cast, some time to kill, and turns out there was a show match going on, so I said, hey, can I be part of this shizzle? And they said, yo, dog. None of that happened. I'm the least gangster person you could ever possibly desire to know. Whatever the case, I do have the opportunity to bring you this best of 7 between this man. He is in the blue trunks, playing Protoss to the northeast of Daybreak. He is Axiom.CranK. Versus his opponent, formerly of Millennium, now on MYM. To the southwest in the red trunks playing Terran, it is MYM.Dragon. Oh yeah. Dragon versus Crank. This should be a good one. And the reason it should be a good one is because both of these guys play a lot of Heart of the Swarm, which means they know what they're doing. I don't know about you, but I've watched a few games of Heart of the Swarm lately. Quite a few. And a lot of them have been really dreadful. You don't know why? Because no one has any idea what they're doing. These guys are exceptions to that rule. There's been quite a few other top-tier foreigners that have been focusing on Heart of the Swarm. We've got people like White Ra playing a lot of HotS. We've got people like Idra playing a lot of HotS. It's kind of a big deal, because that means they know what they're doing. They're ahead of the curve. Then we've got Dragon and Crank, who have also been playing a lot of Heart of the Swarm. I imagine there's a lot of Koreans that have been playing HotS, but haven't really been publicizing the fact. Crank streams a lot, Dragon streams a lot, so both of these guys are certainly not in the mood to hide. So I'm interested to see what's going to come out of this in this particular series. This is, of course, in the latest patch, which means that Widowmines have got a bit of a buff against Protoss because they now do extra damage versus shields. That means you can pop a Stalker in one hit. It's pretty huge, honestly, when you think about it. So I'm interested to see how that ends up working out. Hellbats in general are pretty powerful too. They're being used en masse against a lot of different races and a lot of different compositions, and they're working pretty well. They're very cost-effective units, honestly. To the point where the Marauder is actually kind of falling out of favor a little bit, because the Hellbat, while it doesn't do that direct damage like the Marauder does, and it can't stim, of course, like the Marauder can, it does do a lot of AoE damage, and it tanks a lot of punishment, too. So that's definitely something to consider there. I'm going to see a Reaper opening here from Dragon. Definitely don't hate this. The Reaper, of course, can now be built without the Tech Lab. And it doesn't do as much damage as it used to. It used to be 4 per shot, and it shot twice in a volley. And then it was something like +5. Pretty sure it was +5 against light. So it would do a total of 18 damage per shot. It was kind of brutal. It means you could 3-shot a worker. That's now been changed. It only does 4 damage per shot, as you can see, and it does 2 attacks. So it hasn't been nerfed against anything that isn't light, which unfortunately means it's essentially been nerfed against anything it was good at, right? The way that the Reaper used to work is that it was great for early game harass, and then it fell out of favor, and then there were some limited situations where you might want to use it against a very zealot-heavy Protoss, for instance, because a lot of Reapers do a lot of damage against a bunch of zealots, especially if they happen to be behind a nice big meaty wall, for instance. But overall, Reapers have not exactly been used an awful lot in Wings of Liberty, especially not after the infamous 5 Rex Reaper strategy. Speaking of infamous, we do have a proxy factory coming down here from Dragon. That's an interesting possibility. You can do all sorts of things with that, especially on a map of this size. We could be seeing proxy Widow Mine here. Proxy Hellion doesn't make as much sense. Reaper's now moving in. Let's see how much damage it can actually do. Probably not a lot. It's going to get a lot of scouting information and really not a lot else. So you're essentially paying for that. But in the meantime, we've actually got this little rush here from Crank. I've seen this quite a bit from Protoss players, and this actually landed before the bunker went up. So a later bunker from Dragon, and it looks like he's going to take significant damage here. I mean, that's already quite a lot of SCVs, and that Zealot almost going... Oh, the Zealot lives as well. That is brutal. The bunker completes, but nobody's in it, and suddenly Crank is in the base, and there's nothing to stop him doing a lot of damage to the worker line. Really nice surround here by Dragon. He's going to be able to take the Stalker out, but in the meantime, we've got a Ring Around the Rosie going on, and the Mothership Core taking plenty more kills here. It looks like it's actually going to kill that Marine without too much of a problem, too. This is... Wow. Okay, he's already killed 7 workers, and this barely cost him anything. He invested a Stalker and a Zealot into this attack, and as you can see, resources lost-wise, this is way, way worse for Dragon. Now, obviously, the Mothership Core doesn't do a lot of damage, but it certainly does enough to take off enough health to get rid of that, and that's going to be a freebie there. The Marine just sort of sent in there a sacrificial to try and drive the Mothership Core away while the next Marine came out, and in the meantime, what do we have? Well, we've got this Widow Mine deployed. The Reaper still being a bit of a pain. Stalker is now out. I think that was actually... It could have been a second Reaper, though. It's hard to tell. It's most likely the same Reaper, and it probably ran off to do its little combat regeneration thing with combat drugs there, so... Down it goes. Widowmine was deployed. Widowmine's now actually been moved in, and it did not die to that probe surround either. It had 1 HP left. Luckiest Widowmine in the world. That's now going to be a huge pain in the ass, because of course it forces that Observer out, keeps the Protoss player honest. You can't skip that Observer in this situation, because that Widowmine's a big threat. And another one is burrowing right here as well. He manages to move the Stalker out of the way, because that would have been a one-shot. And Widowmines are just stupidly efficient right now. Interesting thing going on here. The pylon was placed and actually finds the proxy inadvertently. The probe gets killed there by the Widowmine. Widowmine is now trying to drive its way into the natural mineral line to do yet more damage. Parks itself next to the Nexus. Fires off, and that was a mistake there by Crank to allow his Mothership Core to get that close. So, once again, are you ever going to see a cost-inefficient Widowmine in this game? It seems unlikely. Now, these have been driven away, which is a bit of a pain in the arse, obviously, for Dragon, because he can't build any more medevacs for a while. He's having to deal with an awful lot of nonsense. He is trying to construct some Hellions, so we'll see if he can do any damage with that. Overall, the current situation, though, is the amount of damage that Crank did at the start has really slowed Dragon down. He's not got this command center up yet, whereas the Nexus is fully operational, has been established for a good amount of time there for Crank. So this is looking good for him. He's able to produce workers 2 at a time. So what is Dragon doing? Dragon is going for double CC to try and play catch-up to this. He knows that he's late. He knows the timing of this because he scouted it. He knows that his CC in comparison is way late, and so he is in a position where he either must do damage or he must double expand to try and play catch-up. And he's not in a position where he can really do damage. He just lost his tech there as well, which is really unfortunate. And here comes a drop from Dragon. So he's going to try and do that damage, but he isn't able to really do a lot. Plus, these drops are a little bit riskier these days, simply because of Photon Overcharge, which can be used to shut down a drop quite easily. The Mothership Core is... It was kind of out of position there. Can't use Photon Overcharge yet, but it can in the next 8 or so seconds. So it would be very risky for this drop to continue. It's been shut down pretty easily. A little bit of mining time wasted here, not by much. So this drop overall, I think, has been cost ineffective. Some workers killed, though, so I don't know. I mean, maybe it did work out pretty well. He didn't exactly use a lot to make that happen, so I'm pretty sure that he killed a few probes, and the rest were killed by Widowmines, so it's not too shabby, but definitely wasn't as effective as he wanted. Crank, on the other hand, tried to harass with a Warp Prism. Already Battle Hellions, or Hellbats as they're now called, being moved in to deal with it. Looks like that is not going to be a factor. Crank is going to move out of position here, and he also has this proxy pylon down. You know what I'm really worried about here? Dragon just doesn't have a lot of units. I mean, he's sitting on 4 Hellions and 5 Marines, and this bunker's always going to take damage, and if Crank just goes in here with pure Stalker, then I don't see Dragon being able to hold this. In fact, this is looking really ugly for Dragon. In comes Crank, and the push is pretty solid. Crank hasn't really lost a unit yet. Deploys the force field to prevent the repair, and the bunker goes down, and Dragon is absolutely boned. GG, ladies and gentlemen, there you go. And Crank picks that one up pretty easily, if I'm totally honest. That was kind of surprising. Good lord. Insanity. But there you go. That was nicely done. Dragon, I think, I mean, he did the right thing. What Dragon essentially did was he went double orbital, and he did so specifically to try and play catch-up. And he knew he had to do that because he was behind. He didn't do enough harassment damage. Unfortunately, he didn't have enough to hold. It may be with a few more bunkers, but even then, I mean, Crank was sitting on like 10, 11 Stalkers, plus could warp in more. I don't know. That did not go well for Dragon. Let's see how he can do in Game 2, which will be coming your way very shortly, right after this break. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. Welcome to ShoutCraft, and of course, this show match series between this man, currently up 1 game in this best of 7 series, hailing from Team Axiom in the, I don't know what color that is. I'm going to assume it's kind of purple-ish. We'll go with purple-ish trunks. Stylish. Lilac, perhaps. That might work. He's to the north. He's playing Protoss. He is Crank versus his opponent in the blue trunks playing Terran to the south here of Antigua Shipyard. It is MYM.Dragon. Oh, yeah. Well, well, well. The whole point of this show match series was supposed to be a live cast, but XSplit crapped itself, as it has a tendency to do. I tell you, streaming's hard, man. At least it is when the 2 software alternatives are both unreliable for whatever reason, but that's fine. That means I can just film it in 1080p here for your channel. I say your channel. It is yours. It is collectively yours. You own the channel. No, you don't. Let's not give you that attitude at all, but I'm making it for you. Seems like a good idea. Alright, well, let's see what's going on then. So, we got Dragon kicking off and not actually opening with a Reaper this time around. The first game he did do that. And what ended up happening was, unfortunately, he didn't really do a lot of damage with it. And the initial harass by Crank, which was essentially a Stalker, Zealot, and Mothership Core rush, did way, way more damage than anything that Dragon did. Held him back significantly. It meant that Crank could establish his natural base much, much easier. And it forced Dragon into a greedy double CC move, which was overwhelmed by a Stalker and Sentry and Warp Prism attack in the mid-game. Unfortunate. Well, let's see if he's able to do a little bit better this time. Crank already opening up pretty standard so far. Gets his double gas, one at around 13, one at around 17. Nothing out of the ordinary there with the 12 gateway. Chrono boosting here to get this Stalker out as quickly as possible, and he's actually going to go for a Stargate play, but this is proxy, as you can see down the bottom here. This is actually pretty brutal. It's right next to his opponent. And the question is Dragon looks like he's going to go for Hellions. It could be Hellions or Widow Mines, most likely Hellions, especially with the Starport going down, although you never know. Let's see what he decides to go for. It's going to be Widow Mines, okay. So with the Starport here, it seems like it's fairly likely it's going to want to do some kind of Widow Mine drop, or indeed crazy Widow Mine micro. But he's going to have to deal with the fact that there's going to be Oracles in his base really shortly. I presume this is for Oracles. It may be for Void Rays. It would be really weird if it was for Phoenixes, especially considering the speed, but it's probably Oracles. There we go. So the reason, of course, you would do this with Oracle is you can just do a significant amount of damage. Now, what I hope he does here is he sort of saves this up a little bit, and he doesn't just go in with the one Oracle, because that's just a dead giveaway. But he is going to have to deal with the potential problems of a Widow Mine drop. We've got an Armory coming down really quickly here from Dragon as well, so that indicates to me he wants to go to Battle Hellion pretty quickly, aka the Hellbat now. But a Viking's coming out, which is a really cool decision here from Dragon, because of course he knows that there's a really big possibility of significant damage being done by Oracles here, and if this Viking pops out and the Oracle doesn't get out quickly enough, then he's going to lose the Oracle. And for only 4 workers, that wasn't worth it, especially not with the proxy tech, although it looks like... No, don't... Oh, he's going to stop. If he actually kept going, he would have saved the Oracle. That was a big mistake there by Crank. So it was unfortunate that he did that. So I wouldn't say that this has paid off so far. Dragon's going to go check, find the proxy here. Phoenix is going to pop out. Phoenix versus Viking. Well, Crank's going to get out of there because he knows that that's not a particularly good fight. Viking, of course, is an armored unit, which means it only takes about half the damage it would otherwise from a Phoenix. As you can see, 5 or 10 versus light, so not so good. And now we're in a situation where this Stargate is going to get shut down unless he can stop it. He can stop it if he brings the second Phoenix back and then fires on the Viking. So he lifts it up here and then blows it away. He should have enough energy to cycle this. He's got enough for one more lift, which should be enough to kill it. So there's the double lift coming in. Down he goes. Yes, that was a LOL reference. And we do now have these Hellions moving in. They do have Hellbat mode available. And already, here comes the drop. Got Widow Mine deployed. Photon Overcharge is in play here. Not a large amount of workers killed so far by these Widow Mines. But unfortunately, unless he gets it... Well, he's about to get an Observer out, so he should be okay. And he manages to kill the Medevac, but he doesn't kill the Hellbats before they land. So he's still going to have to deal with that. But he does have more than enough forces on the ground here in order to handle this. It's just going to be a little bit difficult. He needs to keep away from the Widow Mine and not get hit by that. Also, a huge amount of mining time being lost here, so this is really quite nice for Dragon. Even if no direct damage is done, plenty of indirect damage has been done to the income, as you can see. Look at that. That's pretty brutal there. Alright, so Crank is now going to move in with the Phoenix Harass instead, which is, you know, usually you wouldn't really go Phoenix versus Terran in this situation. It's so easy to murder Phoenixes with Stim Marines. So, plus that in the, you know, in a 1v1 fight, they lose to Vikings, so it's not exactly ideal. But he's going to be able to pick off quite a few little things here. He actually managed to grab the mule, and because there are so few Marines on the ground, this is going to be quite dominant. He just needs to make sure that he doesn't actually get killed by the Widow Mines to try and undeploy and redeploy in a good position. This Stargate's now been shut down, so he can't bring out any more of these, but he can start to lift and actually pick these off. Bear in mind, of course, that these are light units, so they die really, really fast to Phoenix Lift. And currently we're in this really weird position where both of these guys are on one base, and they've only just started their expansion here at the 9-minute 45 mark, which is... yeah, it's not so good. Oh well, never mind. So, overall damage so far. More workers killed by Dragon and more mining time lost, certainly by Crank. I believe if we were to look at... there's probably a... spending. Yeah, we can see there. That's actually a new tab, I believe, in Heart of the Swarm. So, you'll have to forgive me that I'm not quite used to the hotkeys as of yet. But we've got... more, just generally more spend there by Dragon and a much larger army because he has more money, right? And that's not because he's been mining efficiently, it's because the disruption that's been done to Dragon's economy has been significantly less than the disruption done to Crank's economy. Oh, nasty. Gotta watch out for that stuff. That's another great thing about Widow Mines is they're absolutely fantastic at defending against any kind of air harass. Those air units generally have fairly low health, so they can take significant damage from Widow Mines. And also, because of the fast movement speed, it's much, much more difficult to carefully avoid them. You'd think, oh, well, it's easy, right? Well, you can't outrun a Widow Mine once it fires, so you can inadvertently run into its range, and then you're boned one way or the other. So fast movement speed can often result in you running into more Widow Mines than you otherwise would with a more deliberate and slow unit. Alright. Well, at the moment, we're going to a pretty passive phase, but we're seeing an interesting choice here by Dragon to actually go for Thors. So he's going to play primarily mech here, Hellion Thor for the most part, a couple of Vikings in the air as well. It's going to be quite nice if you want to, say, pick off the Observer. You can scan for that, kill it very quickly there with the Viking, and also you can handle the Phoenixes. We won't be seeing any more Phoenixes coming anytime soon, I don't think, from Crank. He seems to have no intention. The question is, where does he go with his tech path here? He is building some Immortals, which is nice, don't get me wrong, but he is lacking this sort of endgame tech. I mean, just think about it for a second. You're going up against tier 3 units, essentially, in the form of the Thor, and you don't really have a great way to handle that with your own tier 3. Immortals are pretty fantastic for that, but against a lot of Battle Hellions, you're not going to find Immortals really doing that much, because these are still light units, so you don't take the bonus damage. Drilling Claws are also being added. These are fantastic. They allow you to drill your Widow Mines into the ground in 1 second rather than 3, and that's a massive difference in a fight. It means you can actually pull off Widow Mine flanks, which are very effective. Now, if we're looking at the army supply right here, Dragon's army is significantly larger, and in a fight here, I would definitely rate Dragon's army. He's got a lot of Hellbats. He's got a +1 upgrade, which is going to be in effect before Crank's upgrade finishes, so that's a pretty big deal as well. Crank has a pretty Zealot-heavy army, which is going to get absolutely murdered by these Hellbats, and it's going to be difficult to hold. He's going to have to play for time here. Now, you can do that, but with a single Thor in the mix, that's going to be able to stomp those force fields quite nicely. The other opportunity, of course, is that he can use this pylon here to warp in Zealots and actually go in and harass the worker line in the natural here. Interestingly enough, Dragon decides to pull back, which I feel was actually a mistake. If he'd gone in there, I think he would have won that fight, and force fields wouldn't have really made a huge amount of difference because of the Thor just stomping them down. Unfortunate. This is going to give Crank an opportunity to start to catch up here. He's definitely behind his economy. You can see 51 to 44, plus, of course, mule count. Dragon's expansion has been up for longer. So, if Dragon wasn't playing so passively here, I feel that he could have maybe even ended the game, or at least have done significant damage, forced Crank to back away from his natural, which would have essentially been a death sentence in and of itself. But as it stands, Crank is able to add on 3 more gateways, taking up to a grand total of 6. Still not looking for tech, really. He is going for charge, which is an interesting move considering the number of Hellbats on the field. Now, don't get me wrong, they're still pretty effective, but Hellbats were buffed specifically against Chargelets, and they can do a lot of damage. I mean, they've got +2 already. That's 34 damage per shot. And bear in mind, these are in an AoE as well, so Zealots don't really last all that long against Hellbats. So I'm intrigued to see why he chose to do that. I mean, he obviously knows the composition of his opponent. Now, this is an interesting maneuver. This Stargate was never killed. So adding another pylon in here means that some later game air harass could suddenly pop out. Now, Dragon is already sort of guarding this with Vikings, and that may very well be against air harass, or it could, of course, be against the possibility of warp prism play here. But one way or the other, it's smart that Dragon's done that. This is going to be an interesting gambit if he can pull it off. The question is, what does he decide to do with it? If he does it while Dragon's Vikings are at the front fighting with this army, then he could gut this with Oracles, potentially. Although Dragon is also building a missile turret here, so Oracles are not going to be able to stick around for too long. Question is to decide to do anything. Well, right now, he's just pumping everything he's got into the army. I like the decision to get some Archons in there. That's a really nice buffer. Very, very nice against big, clumped-up Hellbats as well. Phoenix is taking a lot of damage being driven away here. Also added a Raven in there as well. That's actually a really nice, it's a nice composition. Overall, this is a really scary army, actually. And I don't think Crank can hold this. Like, you can see the supply count is way in favor of Dragon here. And I feel that a good engagement here from Dragon should easily end the game, especially with the number of Hellbats that are involved in this composition. A lot of Widow Mines being deployed as well, so there's no real way Crank can actually sally forth. This third is essentially dead. He's going to be forced to cancel that by the looks of it. You see the new shield effects kicking into play there. And honestly, Crank's just going to have to hope for a really, really good hold at the ramp. If he doesn't manage to pull that off, then he's going to be in serious trouble. Throwing himself at these Widow Mines will just murder him horribly. This contain is really, really solid. Third base is already coming up. He can, of course, attempt to harass. Oracle already tried to do that, but it took significant damage and didn't actually kill anything. So this harass kind of playstyle is something that Crank likes to revert to in PvT. We saw it against Tasia twice, of course, at the breakout MLG event that he went to. And it works extremely well, if you can pull it off. You can already see the Oracles now moving in here for harassment, and with this pylon here, he could easily warp in Zealots to attack the third base, but he still has to worry about splitting his forces a little bit too thinly. Oracle now moves away, of course, he can't do anything, but it's got 7 kills. It's starting to sort of close the gap. There's the Zealots that I was talking about. This chargelet harass style onto the third base is extremely effective. A lot of these SCVs are going to end up going down here. They're all very, very focused on building missile turrets, but of course they have no defense against a ground army. And Dragon might actually be forced to pull back. That was a lot of Zealots, so that's a good maneuver. That's pretty much all that Crank could really do at this stage, and he's having a field day here, but we're going to see Dragon actually heal up some of these units and even try to micro some of them away. All the Zealots are going to go down to the Hellbats, of course, but that's a lot of workers killed. The question is it enough to really catch up? Looks like even the Widow Mines are being forced back there, and Crank is now able to sally forth and hopefully re-establish third base. He's actually making one up to the top here instead of building it nearby. Interesting move. Crank's Stargate is still available. Now that has been spotted and eliminated by Dragon. Really smart play, knowing, of course, that those Zealots must have come from somewhere, and they definitely didn't come from the natural, so there must be a pylon. So he hunts that down and eliminates it to get rid of the possible threat of Zealot run-bys. That bought Crank time, but he's still behind. He's also supply blocked. He lost that pylon, which means he's not going to be warping in anything for the next 20 seconds or so, which could be crucial because I don't think he's got 20 seconds. Dragon is marching forward with this huge army. It looks like the Mothership Core is going to take some damage here as well. Needs to be careful. Deploys a couple of time warps. Very much burnt through his energy there just to kind of slow the army down a little bit. He could have definitely used those later on. It's going to take another 15 seconds to get anything else. Dragon's now pushing forward here, and everything's been revealed, and here it goes. It looks like those are... Oh, they're locked on with Seeker missiles here. The engagement's pretty good here for Crank, but I don't know if he's got enough units. I guess we'll find out very, very shortly. Crank taking significant damage. The Immortal's doing a lot, but Immortal's fighting Battle Hellions is not really all that efficient, as you can see. A lot of course, the Zealots were eliminated quickly, but he's not down yet. Dragon does have a lot of tanks, and I think the slow crawl backed up by the Widow Mines may very well cause him a lot of problems here. In the meantime, he's not really able to do too much more harass, and the damage that was done here was significant. Turns out there's actually a pylon up in the corner here, so another Zealot run-by is going to happen on the third base, and he's going to try and starve his opponent out. This works very, very well. It's a great way of dealing with Terran. Unfortunately, it would appear that Crank's third base has been spotted, so attempting to establish that simply isn't going to happen. Zealots now move in, and they pretty much gut the third. It'll also let him take down the missile turrets. Force a lift here on this base, but he is going to lose his third in the process. There's also the possibility of these medevacs lifting units into the main base directly behind the defensive line of Crank, which would cause a huge amount of problems. He's also losing units to the Widow Mines at the front here, which... Widow Mines seem to be something that people haven't quite figured out how to deal with yet. And now Dragon's going to move around. I would think Dragon would attempt to lift into the main here with his Hellions, perhaps, but looks like he's not going to bother doing that. Crank's really far behind here, even with all of this harass. It looks really, really good, but even then, he's still only on 2 bases. Scan goes down here, and Widowmines are about to fire off as well. This could be significant damage. Oh, the Stalker line gets obliterated. That was absolutely brutal right there. He's able to move in with the Immortals, and he's actually doing a lot of damage to these tanks because there's no meat at the front here. All the tanks are going to go down, but even then, there are just too many units. Crank plummets to 54 supply, and there's the GG, ladies and gentlemen. That was a really nice game there by Dragon. He did everything right as far as I'm concerned, and he was very, very patient, eliminating Crank and going for the mech contain. Alright, folks, we're going to be going into Game 3 very shortly of this series between Crank and Dragon. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next game in this best-of-7 series between this man right here in the red trunks to the northwest. Playing Protoss, it is Axiom Crank versus his opponent, currently 1 apiece in this best-of-7 show match series. In the blue trunks, playing Terran to the southeast, it is MYM.Dragon. MYM is probably not a name you've heard too much in StarCraft over the past couple of years. I mean, they were in very much the start of the game, around 2010. They've come back with the MYM Academy, which consists of a number of players, including Dragon, who used to be, of course, on Team Millennium. He was on Team Wearer. I believe he was also on Team Slayers at one point, so he's been on quite a number of teams. Dedicated streamer, one of the most popular streamers. Very funny guy, like him a lot. Hasn't shown too many results competitively yet, but of course, Heart of the Swarm could very much all change that. He is one of the players that's been playing HotS since the start, and as a result, he's got some really solid tactics. Now, he is currently, as I said, 1 apiece. He played a very solid mech style on Antigua, which seemed to work really, really well for him. It was not something that Crank was able to deal with. Crank went for Proxy Stargate into Oracle. However, Dragon anticipated this and constructed a Viking prior to that happening. That seems to be the way of dealing with it. Earlier on in the beta, a lot of Terran players, and Zerg of course, were complaining, like, oh, Oracles, like, I can't deal with them, they just kill my mineral line. So what Terran players have decided to do is go for essentially a 1-1-1 opening, which involves getting an early Viking. Now, you can do that, or of course, you could go for an earlier engineering bay, which gives you a missile turret. Oracles are pretty easy to kill. So the missile turret is very effective at fending them off and, of course, killing them if they stick around for too long. The Viking, however, can chase them and also is more useful later on if they decide to bring the Oracles back in. If you build a missile turret, that means the Oracles are just going to run away, right? Okay, you've negated the damage, which is nice, but you haven't killed them. And what happens if the Oracles then come in later on in the game when you're on 3 or 4 bases and start harassing you that way? Well, a Viking, and indeed a couple of Vikings, are very effective at dealing with that, so it seems to be a good way of doing it, and that is the strategy that was employed there. Now, Crank is opening the same way as he has the past couple of games, which is Gateway directly in the base, right next to the pylon, going for 13 and 17 gas there, and then into the Cybercore. The question is, what does he then go for? Immediately for Warp Gate, which he then cancels, interestingly enough. Alright. He went straight for Warp Gate, then cancelled it. Alright. I believe it was because he wanted the Mothership Core first. So, a Mothership Core does cost 100 gas, which means that if you want the core, then Warp Gate is going to be delayed. But it is now coming in. So, he's got that core, that means that that guy's going to die, which is always nice. Takes him out before the Stalker can actually get out there, so a little bit quicker to deny there. It's also a pylon outside of his base. Again, I really like this from Crank. He does this with a long view in mind. It gives him the ability to warp in past any kind of contain. And we saw that be pretty effective on Antigua, but it wasn't enough to actually win. Now, Dragon has sorted himself out with a bunker much earlier this time around. This is the same rush that Crank was using in the first game, and it was very effective. It did a huge amount of damage. However, Dragon was able to get up an earlier bunker this time around, so it's unlikely that Crank will be able to do as much damage on the front. He can poke up there, he's going to see the bunker, he's going to take a little bit of shield damage, which of course will be regenerated here, and now Widowmines are being deployed as well, so any attempt to go up this ramp is very risky. He has no detection, so that will end up with his Stalker getting torn to pieces. Wouldn't be good. He can poke in there with the Mothership Core and see a few things, but he can't really do a huge amount of damage. If he were to fire on a Widowmine, well, I don't think he could kill it. I mean, that thing only does 8 damage a shot, so it's going to take him, what, 12 shots to kill a Widowmine, which is not ideal. Widowmine could easily borrow out of that without too much of a problem here. So this overall little rush here, I mean, it's not economically damaging to him. It's a pretty solid way of doing things. He's still only doing this on one gate. But he is building a second gateway and an observer before his expansion, believing perhaps that his opponent's going to go Widowmine heavy, and he's right, he is. That's exactly what Dragon's doing. He's also adding on an armory and, of course, a medevac coming in right here as well. So that could lead to an early Widowmine drop, which would then probably end up being followed up with Hellbats. Seems to be a pretty standard build here for Terran versus anything right now. Hellbats quite strong. Certainly a lot stronger than they were at the start, and surprisingly so. It almost seems like in about 80-90% of circumstances you want to have Hellbats and not Hellions. Even against stuff like Stalkers, they're actually pretty good. So Dragon's going for this push, and it is a 2 Widowmine push. Is he going to bring the others? He is going to drop them. So he's going to push towards the natural here with those Widowmines. There is an observer out, but it is all the way across the map, which means it's not going to be contributing to this fight. There is a second observer, though, moving in this direction. So now that Stalker's actually spotted these Marines moving across, it's going to be a little bit suspicious here. The question is, of course, does he bring the observer out of position? There is that Widowmine drop as a big threat. At the moment, we have this engagement here, which Crank does have enough Stalkers. He's also bringing in a Zealot, so he shouldn't take any losses here unless he doesn't micro properly. This is the drop, however. Photon Overcharge goes in, which is not quick enough to kill a Widowmine. Extremely annoying. And the Mothership Core is going to have to get out of there. Oh, no, it's going to take some damage. It's not going to go down, though. A nice little bit of micro being employed here by Dragon once again to redeploy it. A lot of lost mining time. Down goes the medevac, but takes a Stalker with it. And in the meantime, we've got this push here with Hellbats at the front. And some damage has been done. Not a huge amount, but a lot of lost mining time. Observer comes in and cleans that up, but there are still Hellbats here. They are pretty low on health, though. If he tries to go up there, he's going to die. Unless he might be able to emergency thrust away. Ooh, he spots that and immediately gets out of the way of the Mothership Core before it's able to shoot him down. Would have only taken a couple of shots to actually make that happen. In the meantime, there's this big push coming in. Takes down the bunker at the front here. Denies any possibility of an expansion. And this is pretty crazy. I mean, Crank actually used the force field to force field himself out because he knew that the amount of damage he was able to do there would have been much, much more worthwhile. You can see the drops coming in here, but it's not doing a lot. I mean, it's killing, what, 2 probes? In the meantime, there's 5 Stalkers in Dragon's base, and he actually has no answer to this at all. Widowmine's not going to get deployed in time. Crank pulls away just in case. He even has an observer now, and the workers are coming off the line here, and there's really nothing that Dragon can actually do against this at all. And that is the GG by the looks of it, and Crank easily able to fend off that attack and will not be caught out a second time, it would appear, by that early game aggression. So overall, what happened there is Crank managed to defend with a bare minimum of units. He kept his Mothership Core at home. He used Photon Overcharge to do a lot of that damage. He warped in a couple of Stalkers here and there, kept an observer at his base, but then warped in everything else past that at the proxy pylon, and then ran it all the way down to the bottom. Very nice play there by Crank, and that dealt with Dragon's Rush quite nicely. Alright, we're currently 2-1 in this best of 7 series. I'll be right back with the next game momentarily. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this showmatch series right here, brought to you by Millennium. This guy, formerly of Millennium, in the light blue trunks, playing Terran to the north of, I believe, it's either Corhall City or Newkirk. They all look the same to me. The smog, the urban decay, the sprawl. He's, of course, MYM.Dragon. Versus his opponent, who is currently up 2-1 in this best of 7 series to the east, playing Protoss in the red trunks. It is Axiom.CranK. This has been a really interesting engagement so far because it's been between 2 people that have practiced a lot of HotS. And what we're seeing is some interesting trends. We're seeing Protoss be able to play simultaneously a defensive and offensive game. They have a lot more tools to deal with harassment, and they all come from the Mothership Core. All of them. What they've got is the ability to Photon Overcharge, so they can turn their Nexus into a giant-ass cannon. Really, really good. It also shoots air. Fantastic against medevac drops. Also really nice for shooting at Hellbats, Hellions, pretty much anything that gets dropped, right? Could have taken out Marines, too. It also means they have a mobile unit that can shoot both air and ground that is not too shabby in a fight. It's going to get taken down by a squad of Marines, but it's not too shabby in a fight against individual harassment units. And it also means that they have the Mothership Core teleport ability, which enables them to quickly switch from defense to offense, and vice versa. It's quite nice. So that means that the proxy pylon approach, Crank is consistently doing this through every game. He will place his second pylon outside of the base, not inside of it. And he feels safer doing that because of the mothership core. This then enables him to go and attack when his opponent doesn't expect it, and to just basically warp in a ground force and then run across the map. Because usually what we're seeing here from the Terran player is the attempt to contain the opponent using the Widow Mine, which we might very well see again here. Dragon's been using Widow Mines in pretty much every game, and what he'll generally try and do is place the Widow Mines in such a way that they're going to catch an army moving out. Not only they're great scouting information, but they're actually going to do damage, and now that the Widow Mines are being buffed, they actually one-shot Stalkers, which is kind of insane. Yeah, that's pretty great. Now, Crank's also been employing this rush strategy, which involves a Zealot, a Stalker, and a Mothership Core. It forces the Terran to build a bunker, because if they don't build a bunker, then they take a lot of economic damage. This is what we've seen previously. There's probably a way around it that doesn't involve building a bunker, but so far, the times when Dragon's been successful against it is when he's used a bunker. The times when he's lost a lot of stuff to it is when he hasn't had that. Crank's actually putting out a second pylon right there. He's going to play very aggressively here. I like that. It's a nice little move, putting it there. And of course, this is an unusual map because it has this natural right at the back here. Certainly drop susceptible, but otherwise, this is a pretty nasty rush here. And there is no bunker. There is a Widow Mine. And the Widow Mine could actually make a lot of difference. Crank, however, sees the Widow Mine burrowing and then sends his probe in to cancel the Widow Mine out. This is a really nice move if he utilizes it because it takes 40 seconds to make that thing work again. Wow, he's actually even able to, by the looks of it, he's going to pick off a supply depot for free here. So he could have rushed up the ramp, but of course it is a little bit risky. He's going up against 4 Marines and obviously everything else that gets deployed there, which would of course be more Widow Mines. But that means he gets a supply depot for free. He puts his opponent on the defensive. He supply blocks his opponent, and then he can just leave now. I mean, he hasn't sacrificed anything to do this. The Widow Mine is now being reset, so it can attack again. I like the notion of sending a probe in to actually absorb the Widow Mine hit. That's a really, really nice move. The question is, how much more aggressive does he get? Doesn't want to get too close, for obvious reasons. He's going to take a couple of shots at the Widow Mine. That can be very easily repaired, though. He can't kill it. Doesn't have the damage. But he can just keep poking away. And if he brings more units in, he could employ the Time Warp ability to actually do significant damage. But this isn't what Crank's doing. He's just trying to keep his opponent honest here. In the meantime, Dragon expands, which he can do. I mean, this is a very easy map to expand on because you have this natural at the back. It's essentially a pocket expansion. There's no direct access to it other than the main ramp. So why would you not do that, right? In the meantime, Dragon actually puts an engineering bay down here, that's a really nice strategy, because it slowed him down significantly. You know, Crank wanted to get that expansion down. He had the money for it. He has now been delayed. Dragon built the engineering bay in trade for that, and Dragon gets his expansion up and working before Crank is even able to build his. So this is not looking good initially for Crank. He's going to have to do some damage here, or he's going to have to double expand in order to play catch-up. Dragon is scouting. He finds that pylon, so he's aware of that. That's always good. Admittedly, there is still this one. Bearing in mind the way that this map is designed, it's going to be very difficult for him to actually contain here, which it seems to me like he wouldn't really try to do that. He is building tanks. He is going to play mech, though. So the question is he going to go very Widow Mine heavy here? Is he going to build a lot of Hellions? Does he have his armory up yet? He does not, so I don't expect to see Hellions coming out just yet. It's not that Hellions suck. It's that he doesn't have the transformation mode. You need an armory for that. But it looks like he's going to follow up with that pretty shortly, so that's not too bad. So Crank now has a pretty scary army, and he can move forward here. He does have to deal with these Widow Mines. He does have 2 observers, however, so if he plays cautiously, that should be fine. That is a... wow. That is completely unexpected. Dragon with the expanding right behind his opponent's proxy pylon. That is really the last place you would expect to see that, and I would be very surprised if Crank scouted it. There's really no reason for him to do that. So that's an absolutely fantastic move there by Dragon. I don't expect Crank to be able to find that. If he does, it's absolutely disastrous. Alright, so he's going to now pick off the Widow Mines, and I mean, there is a tank there. There's a good amount of units. This is going to be pretty difficult for Crank to actually push here. And I don't believe he's got his Mothership Core with him. No, he doesn't. He's got that back in defense. I'm just having a look at it. Yeah, it's over there. So he's not going to be able to use Time Warp either. So this is still a pretty difficult push. He's pushing up a ramp against 2 siege tanks. Of course, the Immortals are going to take the majority of the initial fire. Let's see if we can actually make this work. It's going to come down to force field placement, good micro, and already that was really nice to eliminate those tanks, but unfortunately it looks like the Immortals are taking heavy damage here. The last Immortal is still being beaten on here by Hellions and eventually going to go down. Crank is trying his best to break this. He's doing a lot of economic damage. He's going to move right into the base. He's warping another 3 Stalkers, and that may very well be enough. The Immortal actually lived up to its name, unfortunately only killing 1 guy before it finally goes down, but that is a lot of economic damage being inflicted, a huge amount, and there's nothing left to defend against these Stalkers here, and it looks like the tank line just wasn't quite enough, especially with the Immortals at the front to sponge all of that damage up. But Dragon's not out of the game yet. He still has that hidden expansion, so losing a lot of workers, 15 in total. This was not a game winner, at least not yet anyway, but there are a lot more Stalkers coming. He takes a big shot there, very, very unpleasant, and this bunker still lives. Crank, of course, doesn't have Blink either, so these Stalkers aren't going to be lasting for quite as long. A lot of blue splats all over the place, Dragoon style by these guys. Supply depot picked off for free here, and Dragon's still taking a lot of damage. He needs to be able to dislodge these Stalkers. The question is, what can he do in order to make that happen? He doesn't have Stim. He's playing a mech style here. So against Mass Stalker, this doesn't necessarily work all that well. And he doesn't have his armory, so no Hellbats either. Hellions are not going to work all that well against this. Hellbats would be very, very nice. And this Orbital Command is going down as well. Now, he does still have this hidden CC over here, and a lot of mules just got dropped there. But still, I don't know, I mean, Crank's definitely got the upper hand here. There's no real question about that. I don't think Dragon can actually build enough units to kill all these Stalkers. Even with SCVs being brought off the line, it's just more Stalkers being warped in, and that's too much firepower for them to handle. It looks like Dragon is going to be losing this game at this stage. Even with a tank deployed, I don't really see Crank losing this fight. Dragon desperately trying to hold on. In the meantime, you can see he did go for Hellion run by. But that's the beauty of keeping that Mothership call back there, is that it just gets shut down. Only 5 probes killed in total. The Stalkers now move in, and no Stim on those Marines, no combat shield means they absolutely cannot fight against Stalkers. And that seems like the weakness of this mech style against Protoss, is that if your opponent masses Stalker and you don't do enough damage with the Winter Mines and tanks, and there's Immortals at the front to sponge that tank damage, then there is really nothing you can do. You can't fight it straight up, and there's the GG. A few more bunkers maybe would have helped there. Playing a little bit more defensively, but that didn't happen, and Crank takes the victory once again. That takes him to a total of 3-1 there against Dragon. Very, very nicely played. Well executed, and it looks like Dragon's strategy, Dragon's build has been thoroughly dissected here, and he's going to have to change things up a bit if he wants to bring it back in this series. We'll be bringing you the next game very shortly, folks. My name is TotalBiscuit here with ShoutCraft and this Millennium Show match between Crank and MYM.Dragon. Don't go anywhere. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here on Star Station for potentially the final map of this Best of 7 series between this fellow right here and the Blue Trunks playing Terran to the southwest. It is MYM.Dragon. However, he's got a lot of catching up to do because he faces this man in the purple trunks playing Protoss to the northwest. Currently up 3-1 in this Best of 7 series. It is Axiom.CranK. So what we've seen from Dragon up to this point has been a fairly similar mech style, and he has been alternating really between Widowmines and Hellbats. Now, he has, for the most part, gone for this 1-1-1, which is usually translated into a mech style. He's been ignoring Marines, for the most part. He's built a few, obviously, early on in the game. He's had little sort of naked Marine pushes that don't have Stim, they don't have combat shield or any upgrades, and they've been reasonably effective. However, what happened in the previous game is that Dragon attempted to build up this mech style, but he was hit at a really awkward time when Crank was able to mass a lot of Stalkers and a couple of Immortals against what was essentially naked Marines, Hellions, and tanks. He had no Battle Hellion, which means that his Hellions were much less effective against that composition. And overall, Dragon wasn't able to defend against it. Now, what I wonder here is that does Dragon play the same style? Because it seems to me like over the past couple of games, Crank has been able to figure it out and dissect it. So that could be potentially dangerous. Now, Crank is actually now playing a different style. He has opened the same way every single time, but it looks like he might want to try and end this early because this is 1 gas, not 2. And as you can see, the second gas hasn't been taken and is usually taken by Crank at 17 supply. Every game in this series, he's taken that second gas at 17. I have a feeling this could end up being a 4-gate, possibly a 4-gate Stalker all-in with Mothership Core. Maybe. Maybe. Could be something else entirely. We'll see. But with that, basically with that lower gas count, that means he can't get that earlier Mothership Core, which means he doesn't want to go for the same kind of rush that he's employed twice now. The first time he employed it, it was extremely effective. The second time it was dealt with quite nicely because Dragon decided to build an earlier bunker. Worked out pretty well. But this does kind of smell to me like, I mean, look at this. So either he's expanding from this position, or he's about to 4-gate him. Or maybe 3-gate aggression. Well, I guess we'll find out. Just with that one gas, it looks like it might be an expand style. Alright, so it looks like he is going to expand. Okay, never mind then. It seemed like he was going to get hyper-aggressive. But no, he's just going to go for the Nexus. And that could work, absolutely. It depends on what we see here from Dragon. Looks like Dragon is not doing exactly the same style. He's sort of varying it up a bit. He's not building the starport first. He's got the tech lab coming down here and barracks with reactor. Ooh, down goes that Zealot, just obliterated into nothing there by that single Widow Mine. So I have to wonder what kind of style he's going to play here. If this is for swapping over, or if not. Does he decide to go, say, straight into Infernal Pre-Igniter? What kind of game plan does he have here? The lack of starport and the later second gas does indicate to me that he is not playing the same at all. He's going to go Marine Tank. Alright, well, not usually what you would do against Protoss, but lately there has been an increase of the number of tanks being used against TOS. Not a bad style here from Dragon. It does let him expand earlier. Admittedly, he is up against a Protoss that went for... That was actually pretty greedy, let's be honest. That was a 1-gate expand on 1 gas. Pretty... I mean, in earlier games, this would have actually been a really bad idea. Because Dragon has been going for this very aggressive Widowmine and Hellion style, and has been looking to do a lot of damage, so with only 1 gateway, it would be very hard to stop that. But as it turns out, Crank makes the right call here, because Dragon himself is playing a more conservative style. He's not going for super amounts of early aggression. He could definitely go for a tank push here, like maybe 2 or 3 tanks, and then push with Marines. Of course, he doesn't have to build siege mode anymore, which is nice. I was actually speculating that there might be a better timing as a result of this. And it looks like that's exactly what he's going for, as you can see. He's going to push forward with Widow Mine as well. So that's a significant number of units. The question is, how many gateways does Crank have? Because he went 1 gate into expand, into Robo, and then into 2 more gates, which means his army's really small. This could be dangerous. Very dangerous. Dragon's now pushing forward. He's only pushing with 1 tank. Is he going to bring a second one in, or is he going to leave it at home? Looks like he's bringing it along. Okay, so Crank could be in trouble here. If he'd gone straight for gateways afterwards, then he probably would have been in a better situation, but right now he is dealing with a lot of Marines. They are at least not upgraded, so that's kind of a big deal. He can do a lot with those force fields. He's going to have to make this work, though, and Dragon's pushing in very aggressively. Wants to knock down that pylon. There's the photon overcharge, and now if he gets good force fields, then he can really make this work. Only a single Stalker eating the damage there, and the tank's caught unsieged. This is a good, solid defense so far here by Crank. The Zealot wall is going down, though, so the sentries are going to die very, very quickly if he's not careful. Immortal now comes on the field, and Crank should be able to pick this off without too much of a problem. He's going to lose 1 Stalker, but everything else is going to die, so that was nicely handled there. It's looking a little bit dicey for a moment there, but Crank seems to have handled that without too much of a problem. Dragon is now building a 3-bunker wall off because, like, well, that aggression failed, and it did. It didn't do anything, really. 1 worker killed, and that was probably earlier on in the game. Resources lost. Dragon lost way more in that attack than Crank did. Crank only lost a couple of units here and there, a couple of Zealots and a Stalker, and 1 sentry. So nothing really too problematic for him. He still has his Mothership Core building energy, and he's still looking pretty solid on 2 bases. So Dragon's like, okay, right. Better watch out for that Protoss mid-game push. I should sort myself out here with plenty of bunkers. Get a Widow Mine down. Nice grab there. Great positioning of the missile turret, actually. The Observer walks right into that one. Gets gunned down nice and easily. A couple too many workers in there. I'm sure he'll notice in a moment, but hey. Not the worst thing in the world. So currently Crank is ahead. He's taken his 3rd base. He is building shield upgrades, which is interesting. Now, there is a legitimate reason to do this, I suppose, is because Widow Mines have now been buffed against shields, but that +1 wouldn't really make so much of a difference. The thing is that it depends on the metagame, I suppose. If Dragon's playing this sort of marine tank style, and he's actually going to go, he's transitioning out into mech. As you can see, he's taken his barracks, he's moved that away. So he's building another CC, he's currently on 2 factories. So playing a shield style against this could work, certainly. Getting these upgrades, because the usual reason you don't go shields against Terran is because, of course, of EMP. Kind of useless. But depending on if you want to go Immortal Heavy, then yeah, definitely, you want shields. Certainly. That would actually be really, really good against Hellbats, I think. Very cool. Because Hellbats are not really doing a huge amount of damage to armored units. Having that negative modifier with the armor would be great. And we're actually seeing Robotic Spade Tech coming out of Crank for the first time this series. Scan does go down somewhere. Let's see what he knows. Nothing. Pretty much nothing. He hasn't seen the main at all. I assume that scan was probably to get rid of an observer then, because that didn't really do much at all. Proxy pylons now being placed around the map. Crank also scouting for hidden expansions. Crank, bit supply block there actually, kind of surprising, but shouldn't last for too much longer. He's building 4 more pylons. Now going for warp prism as well. Level 2 shields. Again, you know, it's kind of unusual really. He's also building plus air. Alright, this is getting super weird. I have to wonder what he may decide to go Tempest transition later on. There are 2 Stargates coming in. He could, of course, go Void Rays as well. They're pretty good now. So, there are a number of different possibilities. And I can now see why he went shields. Because, of course, shields apply to everything, instead of just going for ground armor. These 2 Stargates are also proxy, just to make matters even sneakier. So if a scan does come in, he's not going to see this. It's going to be a really funky transition. It's hard to call what. I mean, I wouldn't expect oracles because, of course, you know, it's a spell for oracles, right? So it's most likely that he's going to be going for Void Rays, I think. I don't necessarily expect Tempests. Very, very gas heavy, especially if he's going to be building a lot of Immortals as well. And it doesn't really make a huge amount of sense against what Dragon's got, but I guess we'll find out. Fleet Beacon is coming down. Could be Carriers, could be Tempests. That's what we'll be finding out shortly. Tempest does require a Fleet Beacon, so I guess, you know, that seems like the most likely thing. Warp Prism Harass coming in, doing significant damage. Zealots dropped in, and a couple of workers killed. In the meantime, workers also being killed at the 3rd here. We've got the Hellbat attack moving in. Now, here's kind of the one kind of big problem with Hellbats. That was a nice little use of the thrusters there. The one big problem with Hellbats is they can't outrun workers. But they do waste a lot of mining time. It forces you to move away. I have a feeling that what we're going to be seeing in more advanced play is Hellbats used to sort of, almost like sheepdogs really, to sort of herd the probes in the direction of something that can kill them. Because if you're quick on your response, Hellbats really don't do a lot of damage to you at all. Hellions are much harder to deal with because you can't outrun them. Alright, we are going to see Tempests. Interesting. I have never seen Crank play Tempest at all, so this is a really interesting move. Warp Prism shut down very nicely there, and it's a scary army coming in here from Dragon. Crank has kind of been slacking on his army production here because he's been teching so hard. So this could be problematic. A lot of force field used. Oh, could have got the Raven there and doesn't get it. Manages to get out with most of his army intact, but the question is, can he get out enough Tempests to make this worthwhile? Only one Tempest is not going to help him all that much. It's also going to reveal his Gambit, which is not what he was looking for. He could pick off that Raven quite easily, but bear in mind, PDD works against Tempest, so this could be really problematic here. If the Photon Overcharge is used, which it might very well be, it's not going to get used at all. Oh, there it is. It's popped off. Even then, it's not going to do a huge amount. This 3rd is taking a lot of damage. Tempest can tank quite a bit, but unless he moves out of the way, he's not moving. And that Tempest is going to go down. Not well microed there by Crank at all, I'm afraid. I think he's focusing on trying to take the army down from behind. It is doing a decent job at it, but still, losing a Tempest to that didn't seem to make a lot of sense. And Tempest damage isn't really enough to stop this army. It's just going to kind of tickle it for a while, until he gets enough Tempests out and his +2 air weapons finishes. The real risk is that he's trying to take the Marines down here, which of course is a very sensible thing to do, so nothing could shoot the Tempest, but it looks like he's going to get spotted here, and these 2 proxy Stargates are going to get hit. In the meantime, Drop comes in, does quite a bit of damage, but nowhere near as much as Dragon's done so far, so this is all over the place right now. Those 2 Stargates get shut down, so we're going to see no more Tempests out. It's currently only 3 on the field, which is, you can see the damage they do. Not a lot, really. Not a lot at all. More harass coming in, however. Shut down pretty nicely here by Dragon. Down goes the Warp Prism as well, so Dragon's still okay. Sitting on 51 SCVs on 2 bases, and he's just established his 3rd there. Whereas Crank has just lost both of his bases, and of course he's going to be chasing with the Tempest and doing a bit of damage here, but the question is, what do you do from that position? Well, he's actually herding them, as I was mentioning earlier. He's herding them into a position where he can eliminate the rest of Dragon's army. And he is efficiently engaging here. Eliminates the tanks quite nicely, but he did lose that base. So that does put him in a very nasty position. The PDD is being incredibly annoying. Will finally go down. But yeah, the point defense drone being used against Tempest is actually huge because they have a very, very slow fire rate. Stargate's being rebuilt here. Adding on those shield upgrades, which seems to be helping him quite a bit. But I would definitely say that Dragon is ahead right now with his 3rd base established quite nicely. He can continue to move into harass, but with tanks all over the place, that's a little bit difficult. He's actually massively oversaturated here, though. So even though he's got that big worker advantage, his income is looking pretty good because of these mules, but this massive oversaturation that he's got in this area isn't helping him at all. He's actually not mining from his natural. So that's a lot of missed opportunity. In the meantime, Tempest now rolling out. Now, if I recall correctly, this was from a few patches ago, so I may be wrong here. Where's his fleet beacon? He must have it somewhere. Where's he hiding it? There it is. Okay. Yeah. Did they lose their range upgrade? Or do you build it elsewhere? This is what I was wondering, the actual range upgrade on Tempest, because that's range 15. They used to have range 22 as an upgrade. I guess they don't have that anymore, unless it's been moved to a different place. Difficult to say. In the meantime, this 3rd base sitting around. Lots of damage being done by the Hellions here. A lot more lost workers. They are being rebuilt 3 at a time. 38 workers killed. A lot of cannons in place as well, so harassment here is going to be pretty difficult. Dragon has not dealt the death blow as of yet, but he is building a pretty scary army. He doesn't have a lot of anti-Tempest. He's got these Thors here, and of course he can flip on over to the different attack. Now, the one that I mentioned, of course, is the Punisher cannons. These are the high-impact payloads. Much, much better for knocking down single, tough air units. Pretty good against Tempests, assuming you can get in range. Tempests, however, have 5 more range than those do, so it's definitely possible to micro against that and get good positioning. Dragon may potentially have underestimated the number of Tempests that are coming out here because he did kill those double Stargates, but he is building some Vikings now, so it seems like he should be okay. Bear in mind, of course, that it's, once again, 9 range versus 15 for Vikings versus Tempest, so it's very possible to do something against that. It's definitely not a guarantee, and this is going to turn into a really interesting engagement here. Decent amount of Archons, a lot of stuff to buffer siege tank fire at the front. There's going to be 5 tanks involved in this engagement. A lot more Hellions being added in as well. Decent amount of Archons. Now, we've got this scouting barracks being moved in. Now we're going to see the Tempest go in, and there's a lot of Vikings, so he's going to lose a Tempest here, by the looks of it. Yeah, down it goes. That was pretty damn costly, and he's going to be forced to engage in the ground here, otherwise he loses all his Tempests, and I'm not sure this is really what he wanted to do. The question is, can he do the damage? These Immortals are absolutely wrecking face right now. I don't know if he can deal with the Battle Hellions, though. That's perhaps my biggest concern. Immortals need to target fire down those Thors immediately. Crank is doing significant damage. The Tempests are not down yet, and these Thors are going to get melted by these heavily upgraded Immortals. 3 and 3 in shields as well is a huge deal, as you can see. Vikings are going to now land and try and deal with them, but these Immortals absolutely rip through the landed Vikings, and eventually he is, of course, going to lose them, but significant damage being done on both sides. I mean, it's hard to say who even won that. We'll have a look at the resources lost to find out. It looks like Crank may still be doing pretty well on resources lost, even though he hasn't mined quite as many. He did lose all of his Tempests, which are gas-heavy units, but his opponent lost all of his tanks and lost all of his Thors as well, so it's kind of a weird reset situation. The question is, can Crank start to employ his trademark late-game harass versus Terran? Can he actually get those Zealots in there and start to do significant damage? This is going to be a Planetary Fortress, so he's not going to be able to do too much there, certainly. Nice grab by Dragon there on the Observer. Crank does have charge here. This third base is potentially vulnerable. It's not a planetary. This, on the other hand, is, so it's going to be difficult to deal with. The question is, what does Crank do from this position? He is comfortably on 4 bases, and the harassment from Dragon has stopped. Dragon is on the defensive, which is definitely good news for Crank. But the question is, what is his army composition going to be? Currently, it's Archon Immortal with a few Stalkers. He has a very small army right now. These Zealots are going to melt pretty quickly. He's about to have +3, so this Napalm Spray is going to do huge damage. Also, bear in mind that the Zealots don't have an armor upgrade, they have a shield upgrade, which is, when you go +3 shield, generally what you don't want to do is build a lot of that. The reason you want to do a lot of that, oh, that's a sick move right there. The army is so slow trying to move in here, so some guerrilla tactics being employed by Crank slows the army down completely with Time Warp at this area here. A choke point, is able to get out of there without taking any losses. He shouldn't be taking an engagement here because there are so many Hellbats. But that was really nicely done. The question is, does he have enough units to engage here? I don't know about this. He does have a lot of Immortals, though, so maybe he can. The Thors are actually caught at the front, and the Thors absolutely melt. The Hellbats are completely out of position here. This is pretty brutal here. Very, very nice engagement by Crank, but does he have enough units, more to the point? It looks like he does, very much so. All the Hellbats get obliterated by the Archons, and that was, dare I say, tactical genius. Dragon later tonight will wake up in a cold sweat screaming, "Creed!" Crank with a sick maneuver there, and yeah, I'm biased for my own player, but that was just beautiful and terrifying. I never want to see that as a Terran player. Oh my god. Crank goes through with a great composition and is now just absolutely ravaging his opponent. GG. Ladies and gentlemen, there you go. Crank wins 4-1 in this Millennium Show match here against MYM.Dragon with an absolutely phenomenal use of the Time Warp at the end there. That was a thing of beauty. There you go, folks. Show match series here between MYM.Dragon and Axiom.CranK. Congratulations to Crank for winning that one. And thank you once again for setting this up, Millennium, and MYM.Dragon for participating, who put on a great show today. My name has been TotalBiscuit. You have been watching ShoutCraft. Let me know what you think of this format, by the way. I decided just to put everything in one VOD, so you kind of get that constant streaming experience. So let me know if you think that's a good idea. If it's not, then I can always change back, but I would definitely like to hear some feedback. Thanks a lot, folks. I'll see you next time.